applying the law against a certain political party to their role when it comes to safeguarding the security of citizens. In terms of the Constitution, the practice of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment is outlawed. But a few days ago, there was an incident where one of the opposition supporters, Magaisa, was assaulted, severely assaulted by some police officers. There was a statement that they'd arrested those police officers responsible. But you do not expect such conduct from the police, especially considering their mandate in the Constitution of protecting property, of protecting lives, and being impartial. There have also been quite a number of arrests of the opposition political party supporters. And then you also see the general environment within which human rights defenders are operating, the closing of space. But what is more critical is the role that human rights defenders who are working collectively in the form of civil society organizations play, but also the current efforts by the government to close that space for civil society organizations. There's a private voluntary organizations bill that is currently before Parliament, which specifically says that civil society organizations should not do any work that can be deemed to be supporting a political party, to be supporting a candidate in any election. And it's not very clear. It's a very vague provision that is in the bill, and it's not clear what support means. But if you look at the history of political violence in Zimbabwe, those at the receiving end have always been in the opposition political parties, whether it's them being arrested, them being denied the right to hold rallies, hold meetings, or those who are victims of political violence. You also see in the past, which is also happening now, that sometimes when members of the opposition are victims of violence, political violence by even non-state actors, by rival political parties, sometimes they try and go and report to the police and they end up getting arrested. There are a few cases that have actually happened. And in some instances where they go to report other violations like abductions, they are then accused of actually fabricating those incidents. So going ahead, it is critical that we continue to see how we can support the work of civil society organizations. They provide legal representation to victims of human rights violations. And they also play a very critical role in terms of observing elections, highlighting incidents of political violence, as some of them are monitoring violence in the communities. But most importantly, civil society organizations have also been actively pushing for electoral reforms, even before the 2013 Constitution, after the 2018 elections. They've been actively lobbying. Currently, there's a bill that was drafted by civil society as a model bill for electoral reforms for the Electoral Act to be aligned to the Constitution. But it's unfortunate that we are barely a year before the next elections, and Parliament has not really passed any reforms to the Electoral Act. And unfortunately, as the case has been in the past, normally we get these amendments to the Electoral Act being effected late, and sometimes they are not adequate, and there's no time to actually implement those reformed laws. I think I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you so much, Rose. Such a wonderful insight, all the behind the scenes, and people go such lengths to try and stop people from exercising their democratic rights. And I think it is also important for our listeners to see the various ways that the incumbent is using to try and stop these elections, from the delays to the violence, and to just creating an atmosphere which is not conducive for campaigning. And it is really not a good thing for our country and our democracy. And I think you've also highlighted the huge work that civil society has been doing in this sphere. And I think a lot of people can testify that Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights has been one of the first reactors to get to situations and help out some of these human rights defenders. So I think we are really grateful for the work that civil society has been doing, and it'll be quite a shame if the pending PVO bill gets to affect all this progress that has been done. But now I would just like to do something quite unorthodox. I'd like to take us through to this next section and just combine both your expertise and knowledge. Just pose, one grand question to the both of you, and I don't know, you just we can figure out how we can slice it out between the two of you. But I want to hear your opinion on, looking at these general elections. First of all, a lot of people have suggested that the playing field is so uneven and it's so unfair that there's practically no point in participating. And there have been calls for boycott. But do you think it's important for citizens to always participate in electoral processes in any country? And in particular in Zimbabwe, do you think it's important for us to always participate in these electoral processes, despite the general, the general narration that these elections never yield anything? And then finally, if we look at the timing of these elections, it's a couple of months till the 2023 general elections. And I think, in my opinion, any result or any events that are going to unfold in the next couple of weeks are going to have a clear impact on the 2023 general elections. So I don't know if you are in the same opinion, but what kind of impact do you think these elections will have on the upcoming general elections in 2023? So I don't know if Dr. Magaisa, you'd like to start us off, and then Rose, you can just slot right in just after Dr. Magaisa, and then we can probably open up the discussion to the floor afterwards. I think we have a lot of questions, but yeah, you just walk us through why it's important for us to participate in these elections, and what impact will these elections have on 2023?
Well, thanks, Tafadzwa, and thanks to Rose for the very calm and eloquent articulation of what's been going on behind the scenes. I really thought that your presence in this space is important. A lot of the things that we talk about our elections are things that our audience is not unfamiliar with. They already know, but it's always good to hear from the practitioners who are playing a part in these processes and challenging them, to hear what they have to say, and that's why it's really important to hear from Rose and from others. And I'm sure people will have learned quite a few things. I mean, I always hear people asking me, what are people doing? Because a lot of the things are not publicized, but there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, which I call the private front of the struggle for human rights and freedoms. People tend to react to what they read in the news, but they never react to things that they don't see. So it's good to have Rose articulating these issues. The issue of election boycotts, I've spoken about this several times. The election boycott is a mechanism, is a response. It's a tool that can be used in electoral processes to register unhappiness, to delegitimize the process. But it is a tool that has to be, carefully used. It's not something that you can just throw, willy-nilly. The most important thing is that you must have leverage. I hear when people say, Morgan Tsvangirai did well to boycott the 2008 presidential runoff election. And then people think that you can just use the same method in every case. It doesn't work like that. The reason why Morgan Tsvangirai is boycotted and why some of us very publicly urged and supported it before it happened was because we understood that he had leverage. He had won the March 29 elections, and he was recognized as the legitimate winner of that election. The runoff election was not going to have legitimacy if he did not participate. So Morgan Tsvangirai was holding the cards, and it made sense for him to say no. The same thing could have happened in 2013. Unfortunately, there were different views on that, but I know for sure because I was part of the process that many influential members of the region and the SADC at the time was the guarantor of the global political agreement, was willing to listen and understand the issue of the opposition boycotting. But unfortunately, other people had different views and there was participation. A boycott in 2018 was unlikely to yield much because at the time the opposition did not have leverage. If anything, the opposition needed to demonstrate its presence and that it was still a force to reckon with after the coup. So you don't just throw in the word and then say let's boycott unless you have leverage. There must be something that you're going to achieve by doing so. I don't for a moment believe that a boycott of by-elections at this point will achieve anything. The by-election will just go ahead. If anything, it will give an opportunity for actors that are supposed to be challenged and defeated in this by-election to claim space that they should never claim. You can think of the boycott that happened in 2014, which allowed, ZANU-PF characters who should never have been anywhere near parliament to get into parliament. And in fact, they made some gains, which were evident in 2018 because they were, they had already gained some space in areas that they should never have been. So we have to be very careful. I mean, the other reason for me is, which is why when we talk about irregularities in the elections, we have to be very careful how we couch what we do and what we say, because the more you highlight the perceived problems and real problems to the electorate, the more you demoralize that electorate. They will say, "Oh, what is the point? You are asking us to register to vote, but at the same time you are telling us that there's no point. What's the point of doing so?" So you end up playing into the hands of the very system that you are fighting against, and people will stay at home. And again, when you raise these issues at this particular time, a few days before the election, the electorate will get confused. You have to be very clear concerning the position. And I'm happy that the opposition party has not talked about boycotting by-elections or boycotting any election. They went into this. Some of them were not ready for it. They did not want it, but they were persuaded that it was necessary to be part of that process, regardless of its challenges. Zimbabwe is not the only country that has undergone authoritarian rule. You will find that a huge number of countries, run elections in ways that are similar, maybe close to, and sometimes worse than Zimbabwe. Nobody gave the Gambian opposition a chance in 2016 when they were fighting Yahya Jammeh. They thought it was a foregone conclusion that the dictator who had been in power for so long, who was in control of the electoral system, would go through. But the opposition, surprised them and won that election. Yahya Jammeh didn't want to go, but ECOWAS, one of the key referees in the region, the Economic Community of West African States, stood up and said, "No, you have to go." Many behind the scenes activities were done in order to make sure that the election result was upheld. So, look, we have to accept that we are in an authoritarian environment. And once you accept that you are in an authoritarian environment, you are always going to go into an election where the where the playing field is uneven. It's never level. There are always going to be impediments. There are always going to be advantages of incumbency. What you are fighting for is to mobilize as many people as possible to get out there and to vote. The issue of the voters' roll is very important and is very concerning. We must also understand, of course, that the voters' roll is a document that will affect all the political parties that are participating in that election. If there is evidence that the voters' roll has been manipulated and that it is disadvantaging some parties and not the others, that evidence is not shown by marking the voters' roll and saying this is what has happened. It is actually confirmed by what happens in the voting process. The information that has been released commendably by organizations such as Pachedu awaits confirmation on 26 March. That will be hard evidence that, look, this is what we were saying about the voters' roll. These are the CCC supporters who have been disenfranchised. These are the supporters who have been buzzed in from other constituencies. These are the issues. You do that by demonstrating and by participating. This is a phrase that is often used. Politics is praxis. It's practice. You have to participate. You have to be in it, and you have to demonstrate it with, hard evidence. This by-election is a dry run of what's going to happen in 2023. You don't want to be doing what's happening now in 2023. If anything, those irregularities, those problems should be demonstrated in this by-election in order to advocate for the reforms that are required. If things go so badly in this by-election, if there are clear evidences of bias, clear evidences of manipulation, this is the time to demonstrate that evidence for me. So, no, the issue of boycotting these by-elections is a no-no, in my opinion. The opposition is already in it. This is the time to demonstrate how the electoral system works. It's not a by-election that is going to determine how 2023 is going to go, but it's important as a way of demonstrating how this electoral process is working. We've already gathered evidence, as we can see. Rose has articulated how the police have shown themselves to be biased. We already have evidence of how the public state broadcasters are biased. We're already seeing evidence of how ZEC is conducting itself. You don't stop there. You go through to the end of the process and you gather that information. If there's going to be cheating, let it be shown on 26 March and let the evidence be there, so that when you do your advocacy internally and in the region, you've got the clear and hard evidence of what you are complaining about. It doesn't have to be theoretical. Let it be practical, shown by what happens on 26 March. I should have said I'm going to end there, Tafadzo. I'm very conscious of the fact that our people who are listening will have contributions and would like to ask questions. So I'm trying to limit myself as much as possible to what I can say. And so let me offer an opportunity to Rose to say something before perhaps you go on and call for questions. I know people always have so many questions and there's never enough time for them to ask.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Rose, if you can go ahead and just offer your opinion on some of these issues, please.
Thank you. So, why is it important to participate in elections? As a starting point, the right to participate in elections is a right that is provided in our constitution, and it's also something that has been acknowledged at the international level by the international community. We have so many conventions, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And most recently, the government actually signed the African Charter on Governance and Democracy. So those human rights instruments entrench the right to participate in choosing representatives that will govern the different countries that are state party to those human rights instruments. So once citizens decide to say that they're not going to participate in elections, or politicians decide they're not going to participate in elections, and the other side continues to participate, that means that those citizens have forfeited their rights to choose who can represent them. And this representation is very fundamental because it touches on basically almost every facet of those that participated or those that did not participate. Their lives will be affected. Parliamentarians can make laws that can actually benefit certain sections of society. So it's important for all the citizens to make sure that their voices, their issues are adequately promoted in Parliament. And if you look at the other electoral processes that we have in terms of local government, you get the right people to be in the local councils in the different communities who can actually advance the interests of the communities that they represent. In essence, when you elect someone to represent you, whether it's at the local level or at the parliament level, or even at the presidential level, you expect them to then serve you. Once elected, they should be serving communities. Whilst there are concerns around the freeness and fairness of elections, the electoral environment, when you look at the laws that are there that have not been aligned to the Constitution, the application of the laws, I completely agree with what Dr. Magaisa said, that we need to continue to push for reforms so that we can get the elections that we deserve. Otherwise, we'll be forfeiting the right to participate in the government of the country, the right to participate in choosing those that should represent our interests at the local level, at the national level, and also internationally, because once people are elected into office, who hold various positions in government, and they can actually even represent us at the international level, but they should be representing the interests of those that have elected them into office, and they should be accountable to the people that elected them into office. So once represented as a member of parliament, they should continuously interact with their communities, their constituencies, to hear what the issues are, what they want to see, what reforms they want to push for in parliament. And at the local level, you need to see what the local councillor can do for you, issues around service delivery, ensuring that basic services are provided in the communities. So it's important for citizens to continue to push for reforms and to continue to participate in elections. Otherwise, you get leaders that you do not participate in choosing, who possibly do not hold the same views or interests as you have. But once you participate, you push for reforms, we can move forward as a country in terms of ensuring that our democratic trajectory is on the right course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. I think these were quite powerful presentations from both speakers. And in particular, I think one thing that stood out the most in what Dr. Magaisa, what you presented, has shown, the critical players especially regional critical players in the Gambia case, where the regional partners in ECOWAS, took a stance and, took the route of democracy. And I think this is something that we have been lacking in our scenario, where our regional partners have not been willing to stand on our side when we raise some of these issues. So I think it's quite important as well to keep engaging with some of these partners and ensure that we continue to, push for the right path and fight for democracy. So now I think we really had a lot to discuss and to unpack, and I am sure, as I've seen, we do have quite a number of questions. So I would like to invite members of the public, if you have any contributions, any questions, any additions, subtractions that you'd like to bring into this discussion. But I'd just like to ask you to keep it succinct and short, so that we give each other enough time to speak. And also let's keep it respectful, and just mind that this is a public space, and there are a lot of listeners out there. And let's just let's just keep it great. So I think maybe let me start with Peter. I've seen Peter on my screen. I'm trying to connect. I've asked. So yeah, I think Peter, you can go ahead and unmute and share your contribution.
Thank you very much. Mine is going to be a contribution, not a question per se. And this is addressed to every Zimbabwean who cares about Zimbabwe. In my humble opinion, as an PF under the guise of ZEC, will not give us a free and fair election on a silver platter. As a people, we need to realize that we are one, and for us to get the Zimbabwe that we want, each of us needs to take action. We have a party with individuals who feel entitled to Zimbabwe, and whoever and whatever in it, and it will do anything and everything to hang on to that political power. Therefore, any Zimbabwean who feels strongly about changing the fortunes of this country, I think should individually and collectively do anything and everything to make our votes count. It has been well documented that ZANU-PF will do anything and everything at every stage of an election to put spanners in the works, and little by little, that chips away hope for a free and fair election and overall tip the balance of power to their party. They don't care. They don't care about it. They don't care about a marginalized electorate or say the socio-economic problems that have resulted over the years, or how people from our other countries now see us as leeches or people that disturb their peace. It is up to us to resolve this. We are not getting help from anyone else, and we have to do all we can to change this in every way possible with the same zeal as ZANU-PF, in legitimate, non-violent ways, of course. I will conclude by saying everyone has to act. If you have been complaining on Twitter but not registered to vote, know everything, your candidates, polling station, volunteer if you can, and be prepared to wait at that voting station until results to defend your vote. If you're in the diaspora, donate to the cause. Petition the government of your residency, especially those in SADC, to apply pressure and show that we want a free and fair election. You can even go home to register and vote and subsequently vote if you can. If you're a candidate, make sure you mobilize and organize. Make yourself heard. Do not ride on the presidential candidate's goodwill. Yesterday, I was listening in and Themba Mliswa said on another space, whether you participate or not, we get the government we deserve. It may be difficult, but the only way we can win this is if we match ZANU-PF's energy with our actions. We will be able to stop it, but it starts with everyone. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter, for that contribution. It's always important to listen to what our fellow Zimbabweans have to say about the current situation. And I like the part that you alluded to non-violent means, and I respect that as citizens we need to be one step better than our adversaries, and we need to try and use the best means ways, but try and just always behave in a way that sets the standard for not only for future generations but for other people in the region who might be facing similar situations. I would like to invite next Taona. If you can hear me, Taona Denere, you can unmute and share your contribution.
Thank you so much, and good evening. My question is directed to Magaisa, Alex Magaisa. Magaisa, correct me if I'm not wrong, but I think 2 days ago you tweeted that a party cannot choose its supporters, or a party cannot choose who is going to support it. But however, a party can choose its leaders. I'm asking this in connection with the latest, performative shenanigans of Dr. Thokozani Kupe. So I just want to ask, what do you think the best way for the Triple C to handle the issue of Thokozani Kupe, considering the fact that the by-elections are as a result due to the commissions and the omissions of Dr. Kupe? The reason being that there have been, hypotheses which were being, thrown around that Thokozani Kupe is actually playing a long game with an eye in 2023 of having more or less like a gentleman's agreement with Triple C that she can maybe, allowed to contest in one of Bulawayo urban constituencies, whereby the Triple C will support her candidature. In a similar way, the MDC of Changirai, supported the candidature of Professor Jonathan Moyo in 2008 elections. But as we know, 2 years down the line, Professor Jonathan Moyo somersaulted and went back to ZANU-PF. And also, I remember, the MDC, when they boycotted the elections in 2014, they supported Themba Mliswa, but Themba Mliswa, I think 6 months down the line, he somersaulted and give them a middle finger and started to align himself with ZANU-PF. So I just want to ask, moving forward, how should Triple C, handle the issue of Thokozani Kupe? Thank you.
Okay, I think that we'll be able to answer the questions collectively. I'm not sure if Tafazwa is still there, but I picked your contribution, Peter, and your question, Taona, but maybe we could give others a chance to ask as well so that we can just answer these questions together. I know Munya has been waiting for a long time. Would you like to unmute your mic and ask your question, please?
Okay, thank you, Tafazo. I've got 2 questions that I would like to ask. But before the questions, I just want to say something. SEC is using BVR system, but to me, I'm not sure if they're using the kind of BVR system that I know or that we know. So, in short, I'm saying the BVR system uses physical characteristics, right? So that means all the people that registered with fake IDs, they've got their physical characteristics like maybe fingerprints or facial characteristics or whatever they took. So these people are known, and this is a violation of the Electoral Act. So they must be arrested, right? Same applies to the people that uses fake addresses and fake affidavits and stuff like that. So if there are candidates that are involved, Chigumba once said it in one of her presentations that if candidates are involved in such, they must be disqualified. And candidates also that facilitated like the affidavits of fake addresses or shabby affidavits must also face the law. So my question here comes. So who should file these cases? And should this be the opposition parties, which I think it is the case? And the second question is what is the role of African Court on Human Rights? I understand there's this African Court, and in the case of Zimbabwe, in our case, can we be able to have cases filed or escalated to the African Court on Human Rights? So those are my two questions. And the last thing, it's basically a contribution. This is actually an encouragement to the diaspora.
Munya, you've done very well, Munya, to ask two very important questions. In light of our time and our desire to be more inclusive, would you be kind enough to indulge us so that we allow others to ask a question? I think you have asked very profound questions, which will occupy us. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. All right, thank you for the time. Okay.
Thank you. I see there's D has also been waiting for quite some time. Would you like to unmute your mic and please ask your question?
Oh yes. Thank you, Alex. I'll take 2 minutes max. And this is coming to the issue of the cases that Rose highlighted as being before the courts. Now, one of the things why I feel, or we feel, that our right to vote is being trampled on, and we are essentially, it seems we're not getting relief. It is because of what appears to be a veil of secrecy in the prosecution of these matters. And rightly so, maybe different lawyers will view this differently, but there's always the invocation of the sub judice rule that, you can't comment it publicly. And I think that really plays right into the hands of ZEC, into the hands of ZANU-PF, that, oh, you know what, it's before the courts, don't talk about it. But yet we know that when you shine the light of public opinion on proceedings, then it puts that court in a way that it wants to be seen, at least to be seen, to be administering justice in a fair manner. And I'm not sure in our situation and in the question of the platform today, reimagining undisputed elections in Zim, I'm not sure if we should continue binding ourselves where these matters are there. I'm hearing them first time today that we've got matters in courts, but surely they should have just been posted out there. And if Triple C is a litigant, then its members have a right to know the merits of what is being litigated in the courts on their behalf, and having the public participate. We have seen one key case that were to do with communication rights. Were it not for the public, the court of public opinion on the rights of communication of Strive Masiwa Econet, they would have not got that license. But it was because it was there in the public. People were talking about it in buses and saying, but you know what, this is really unfair. He's a Zimbabwean. He wants to be allowed to communicate through his Econet. Why is this being withheld with him? And with that, you then had a founding father Zimbabwe, Joshua Nkomo, saying, you know what, public, let him be given a license. It works. So coming to what we want to achieve, I think let's not undermine our efforts with things that, in fact, I'm sure Dr. Magaisa, you'll agree, do not have jurisprudence. There is no jurisprudence on sub judice. There has never been a judge that has come out and said, oh, you know what, because people discussed it in public, I was influenced on my decision, because that judge essentially would be saying they carried out a mistrial. So, no one has been fined or taken to prison for putting out the merits of a matter before its determination, putting it out there in public. And if it's a public interest matter, I would encourage Zimbabwe Law Human Rights, put it out there, put the application out on the public, let people talk about it, let that judge know that we know the merits. And indeed, as we go on that diplomatic drive, the diplomats are around in Harare, they will see the merits and they'll say, you know what, you may have said Triple C doesn't have a right here, but we read the contents of this, we read the merits, and this is an unfair judgment. And that is my contribution in saying, I think we need to strategically engage without tying ourselves with rules that don't have jurisprudence. Thank you again, host and Koma, Alex, and Rose. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure we will be able to address it as we make our presentations. Thank you, Dee. Tafazo, I don't know if you are still there.
Yes, no, I'm around, Dr. Magaisa.
Yeah, please go ahead. I thought that you probably had been disengaged. That's why
I was
only
in action. So
good. I see there's Zimbabwe. I'm not very clear whether it's ZA. I think they're also a speaker. Maybe we could have that one last, and then we can try to respond to the questions, because there have been so many questions.
So I think Zimbabwe atmosphere, you can come in, unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
Thank you guys for the opportunity. I always love to get to spaces where people talk about the constitution. Law is my passion. Unfortunately, Zimbabwe to me looks like a lawless society. That's one of the reasons why I opted studying law outside Zimbabwe. I love administrative law, and in Zimbabwe the law is inongochkorwa kuti is side vanhu the way vanoda. We have very good systems. We've got a very nice constitution, which is very clear. As you are talking about my elections and how the constitution views them, I basically see constitution educated nezvema elections. It specifically says anofana kufocuswa by basically someone being of 18 years of age, and definitely this person being munhu Zimbabwe. So I don't understand why Takanda Electoral Act, we made the most important thing, it became about issues of polling station and constituencies and what. Tichikanganwa kuti those who are even outside Zimbabwe, they are still entitled to their vote by just being 18. But that's the most requirement nodiwa pakuvota. Ndiyo iya yekuti munhu asvika 18 and this person is a Zimbabwean and they're not even able to vote. So there are those things what do not. I think here we missed that. We missed the point. But it's a law that's there. We have very smart lawyers in Zimbabwe. I can't wait to become one. We've got very smart lawyers. I don't understand my issues. I think I every day look at Pacheco, how they consistently show good voters to remain inconsistencies. We have got triple C. It's almost comprised of lawyers. But I don't know. Should we? I'm not sure. Should we blame the judiciary system, or should we just blame people at large? Because a judiciary system cannot move on its own. Someone has to go there and the only it has the power, of course, to review government decisions and what. But I can't say kutanga processes. It needs someone to go there, file a claim, file an application, do something. I don't know what's happening in Zimbabwe. I don't know how best can we address. I think my question goes good. We have got vanhu vari aware of this law. Vanhu ngazopendengura mitemo iyi. But hatisi kuiapply sei chiri kujemesa chii. Ma-court system edu haisinazoshanda chichi kuitika. Is it the people kana kuti mu-court system mune corruption yekutoti no matter how much you argue, the law is not interpreted the way it was meant by the legislator to sound. I think that's where my question goes to. Say mutemo ushina urimo wakanaka usiri kushanda.
No, thank you, my brother. I feel your passion in that question, your anxiety as to concerning the misapplication of the Constitution. So Tafazwa, over to you before perhaps you can assign myself and Rose to answer some of those questions.
Okay, no, fantastic. Thank you all for your contributions. I think you guys really raised quite some profound issues. But I'm just going to bring it back to you, Dr. Magaisa. I think One of the questions which was asked was profound, and the people want to know, you know, in the words of the streets in Harare, what they usually refer. But we would like to know, with some of these questions that were raised, what are your thoughts on some of these issues? How can we best articulate them? And I think if Rose, if you're listening, then you're also welcome to just dive in straight ahead and just add to those contributions. And I think we can take one or two more questions after that, and then I think our time is running out, so we might not be able to accommodate everyone. But over to you, Dr. Magaisa.
Okay, thank you so much, Tafazwa. I will touch on some of the questions and leave some for Rose. The question by Taona was directly addressed to me. Now, Taona is a very political question, which perhaps would be best handled in a space that is dedicated to how the Triple C must engage those that are willing to work with it. But nevertheless, I think I will indulge, because I'm sure there are so many other people who may also want to hear an opinion on this issue concerning Dr. Kupe, how to handle the issue. You are right when I said, a political party doesn't have the power to choose its supporters, but it can choose its leaders. The point I was trying to make is that, we have had people in the past. I mean, for example, there are many people who have serious questions about the late former president, Robert Mugabe. But in 2018, he came out and endorsed Chavisa as his preferred candidate. Now, what do? Do you come out and say, no, Mr. Mugabe, I don't want you to be my supporter? That's probably counterintuitive, probably counterproductive, because you are in an electoral contest, and there are people who probably sympathized with Mr. Mugabe. There are people who probably were unhappy with the way that he was treated by the regime. And those people seeing Mr. Mugabe saying, I'm supporting Nelson Chamisa, and at the time the MDC alliance, it probably swayed them to vote for the MDC alliance. You don't reject votes. You don't say, please don't vote for me. That's the point I was making. So, concerning Dr. Kupe, again, someone who has caused so much anxiety, so much trouble, so much hurt over the past 2 years, with the decimation of the party. It was decimated until the MDC alliance no longer existed. There had to be a new political party. And she then comes in and says, well, now I'm supporting you. Again, what do? Do you say, please go away? I don't want you to support me. I don't want you to tell your supporters, whatever supporters she has, to support me. Again, it seems to me, from a political point of view, realpolitik, it is obviously counterintuitive and counterproductive to do so. What you need to be cautious about is, of course, as you pointed out, the designs. What is the purpose? At the end of the day, the party has to have rules. The party has to have protocols on how it engages everybody, including those who are coming in. There have to be processes of how someone becomes a leader. For all their weaknesses, you may even have to look at ZANU-PF itself. It has a process. There are people like Didmas Mutasa, who are very senior members of ZANU-PF, who I believe have now gone back to ZANU-PF, but you don't see them clamoring to be leaders of ZANU-PF. ZANU inoti dzokera kuseo unotangira card carrying member. There is discipline in that respect, and in my opinion, the Triple C itself has to have clear rules on how it deals with people who are joining it, and especially people who may have been part of the broader movement in the past and have committed certain issues that were disagreeable. How they come in. But no, you don't reject supporters, you don't reject votes. I think you would be a foolhardy as a politician to reject people who want to vote for you, or people who want to campaign for you. But of course, you have to be astute enough to understand that leadership is a completely different ball game, and if you understand the long game, you must also have your own game. You must also understand how you are going to deal with it. And I like to think that the leadership of the Triple C has enough wisdom and is astute enough to understand how it would handle such situations. In the same way as handling coalitions, we saw how the creation of the MDC alliance as a coalition unraveled over the past term of parliament, or the current term of parliament. And if it were up to me, I would make sure that if ever there were going to be a coalition with other political parties, they would be structured in such a way that you avoid the pitfalls that the MDC alliance went through over the last 4 years. So that for me is important. I don't think you should dismiss the emotional concerns of people, but I also think that you have to be astute enough as a politician, as a political party, to understand that if people come and they want to support you, it's up to them. Their decision is in the ballot box. You're not going to command them to vote for you or not. That's up to them. What happens when you choose your leadership is a completely different game altogether. There was an issue concerning the African Court of Human Rights. I think that Rose will probably be better placed to answer that, because I know that the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights and other NGOs have actually participated in the African Commission, which is an older body, and there have been judgments which have been given, opinions by the African Commission, which are not binding, but opinions which are supposed to be persuasive in how we implement our laws. But someone asked about public pressure and litigation, and let me just pause for a moment and say, one of the driving factors for the big Saturday read, and the big Saturday read began sometime around 2015, but that was only sort of the new incarnation of the work that I've always been doing for the past 20 years. I've always been ideating, I've always been writing. And one of the reasons why I decided to start writing was because I saw precisely how the law was being used as part of the authoritarian system. And it was either through legislation or through judgments of the courts of law. And I thought that my purpose, as academics, we would write, and we do write for academic journals. And those things are read by our peers, they are read by students, and they write their assessments, and it ends there. This information never really gets to the people who need it. My motivation has always been that my work as an intellectual needs to go to the people. I need our people to understand what the Constitution says. They need it more than my fellow academics and my students. I need people to understand what is meant by political rights. When a judgment is pronounced by the Constitutional Court, I should be able to critique that judgment and put it out into the public domain so that people understand. Because we have a habit of saying, this is what the court has said, and then people say that is the law. My job, if you want to call me a gatekeeper, is to say, this is what the Supreme Court has said, this is what the Constitutional Court has said. However, I believe the Constitutional Court is wrong because of A, B, C, D. That way, people get informed about the other view. These are things that I could sit down and write long academic articles, and which we do. But for me, I think that it's important for us as intellectuals to engage, and that's what we do. If you look at the Sangweni case that Rose spoke about, the moment it was published, the moment we saw that application, I decided that I was going to critique that, regardless of the subjudicial rule and so forth. I said, I'm going to critique it and demonstrate why this application is weak, why it cannot stand the test. And I did so. I don't know whether it would have influenced the way in which the matter was then handled, because I understand that it was then withdrawn or whatever happened there. But that is what we do, and I urge other lawyers, colleagues in the academy, whatever disciplines they are doing, to say that the things that we learn, the things that we write about in our careers, they're not just for our careers. They are things that are relevant to the daily lives of our people. And so when things happen, let us engage them, let us talk about them. And that's what the Big Saturday Read is intended to do. It doesn't please everybody, but you know what? I plow on regardless and continue to shed light on legal developments, political developments, understanding the use of lawfare, understanding the use of the selective application of the law. We've been doing this. We've been sharing this information, and I'm happy to see ordinary people talking about these things, using these terms. Lawfare, selective application of the law. Challenging and questioning the constitutional court. That's what we should do, and I would wish that we have more. I'm happy to see my young brother who is here, Taona, has been doing fantastically well, writing and also critiquing. We need to do more, and this is a challenge that I throw to others, in the academy, to other intellectuals who are here, to say that this is not just things that we reserve for our books or to enhance our careers, but these are things that affect us on a day-to-day level, and we must talk about them and engage the people so that everybody understands what's going on and people can make informed opinions. I'm going to stop there and let Rose handle the other questions, I think, which are more to do with the legalities, and especially the question about the African Court of Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. It was quite interesting to hear the contributions and some of the questions posed by the listeners and participants. Maybe just to start off with a question on the African Court, whether we can actually make use of the African Court. The African Court of Women and People's Rights was created following the coming into force of the option protocol to the African Charter on Women and People's Rights, which basically is an instrument that was agreed upon by the governments on the African continent. Then there were members of the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union. So what happens is that if the government joins or ratifies or agrees to be bound by the optional protocol to the African Court, then the African Court places certain obligations on the government in terms of what the African Court can do when there are cases of human rights violations. The main challenge that we have with the instrument or the treaty that establishes the African Court is that even if the government signs or agrees to be bound by ratifying that treaty, there's an additional requirement that the government has to deposit a declaration allowing citizens or other parties to actually take cases to the African Court challenging the conduct of that government. I think you can imagine whether there are many African governments that have actually firstly ratified the optional protocol that establishes the court and also deposited the declaration to allow citizens or those that are concerned with human rights violations to take cases before the African Court. At the moment, there are very few countries, there are less than 10 countries on the continent that have actually allowed their citizens to be able to make use of the African courts. Some that had actually done that have now withdrawn their declarations. And one of them is actually Tanzania, where the African court sits. But we have an option, its citizens from Zimbabwe. Although we have not ratified the African court optional protocol, the government is still bound by the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which was when it was agreed upon by the African governments, established what we call the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The difference between the African Commission and the African Court is that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has got commissioners They are not necessarily lawyers. Some may be lawyers, some may not be lawyers. It's not really a requirement for one to be a lawyer to be a commissioner for the African Commission. The African Commission can actually hear cases, they call them communications. And there is no requirement for a government to deposit an additional document for organizations that have observer status with the African Commission to be able to file communications on human rights violations against some of the countries on the continent. So the African Commission has a number of cases that have been filed against the government of Zimbabwe. One of the cases that may be of interest was the 2013 communication that was filed by a group of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, who they were calling on the commission to make recommendations for the government to ensure that the diaspora was able to vote in the constitutional referendum. So they were seeking interim relief measures on an urgent basis, compelling the government to take action to ensure that they could vote. The African Commission actually then did issue a provisional order commenting that the government puts in place measures to allow the diaspora to vote. That was an interim order. So the case remained ongoing because they still had to hear the merits and then make a final decision. What was an interim order? It was not respected. I think we all know that the diaspora didn't vote. And then after the referendum, we waited for some time until late last year when the African Commission then actually did hand down its decision on the merits on whether the diaspora should have been allowed to vote. So when the order was handed down, unfortunately, the African Commission said that there was no obligation, there were no violations of provisions in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights when the government did not allow the diaspora to vote. Unfortunately, it took many years for the African Commission to finalize that case. And at the moment, due to the limitations that we have to approach the African court, several organizations on the continent have been working together. We have an African court coalition where we are trying to push as many governments as possible to ratify or to sign on to the optional protocol that establishes the African court, and then for them to also deposit the declarations to allow for litigation to be taken to the African court. It will probably take a long time due to the decreased appetite by the African governments to actually ratify the optional protocol, deposit the declaration to allow their citizens to take them to the African court, but we'll continue to push for that. And then there was inquiry around the BVR processes and the arrest of some of the people who are accused of electoral fraud due to the nature of registration, the number of people registered at addresses, and who can take such cases, who should be filing such cases. In terms of the Electoral Act, such actions are defined as electoral fraud. And in terms of our law, if there's an offense, it really restricts who can report that case. Anyone can report, even a third party who's not directly involved. So there's no limitation. But what we should be pushing for and expecting is that even if there's such a report that is made, then the process of investigating, process of ascertaining the facts, and the process of prosecuting should be done fairly and independently to ensure that justice is actually delivered in an impartial manner to safeguard the rights and interests of those that may be implicated. So we do hope that when such cases arise, even if they are raised by people who are not part of the Electoral Commission, then the investigations are independently conducted. There is no selective application of the law, which we have been talking about, to ensure that justice is not only done, but it's actually seen to be done if there are any offenses that have taken place. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Rose, and as well to you, Dr. Magaisa, for the contributions. I think you adequately answered our participants and highlighted very important issues that we currently face. So, unfortunately, due to our time, we might have to just limit the amount of people that can contribute. So, I just want to ask just one more person. Just to give a contribution, a closing contribution, and then if you can just help me or just to thank also our hosts. But I think after the contribution, then we can just go through our closing remarks and just thank our host. So I think let me ask Signoro. He has his hand up. He or she. I'm sorry about that, but. They have their hand up. So if you'd like to contribute, I think you can go ahead. Just a closing statement or something to just add to this discussion, and then we can close off.
Thank you very much. Thank you, listeners. I would like to thank the organizers of this.
Well,
platform.
Signoro, you would have to unmute yourself and keep it as brief as possible, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think Signoro is having a bit of challenges with the network. So I think we might have to pass and then just ask for another person to speak. Can I ask Elder Benura to come ahead? I think I've just given you permission to be a speaker, and then you can just give us a closing contribution, please. Elder Benura, please.
I think there was Dobbs who has been waiting before Elder.
Hello, can
Okay.
you hear me now?
So maybe we can just slot the two of them. So
if you do it very quickly, please. Yeah, Dobbs.
Yeah, just under 60.
Many things. Just one or more questions. Yeah, the first one is we just see that at times we are managing to identify perpetrators of violence within the armed forces, but there's no prosecution going around, and we wonder why can't they use private prosecution, which is a bit fair and which doesn't require the state to do it. Then the other issue, at times we don't know why organizations which are yet like Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights do the public relations of the state when they went the wrong side of the law. Like today, you mentioned that those who have assaulted Mazibaba with Sanduko, they are under arrest. This is not the case. They just say so. The police just reacted to lower our temperatures. We are aware of that. But once they mentioned, the government is deemed to be taking an action. And the third question and final is why is it like orders given like those ones for fair play on media? Why are you not suing the media once you identify to say it's misinforming and doing all sorts of shenanigans? Yeah, that's my closing remark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dobbs, for that contribution. I don't know if either of you, Dr. Magaisa or Rose, would like to take that question, and then I think that will be the last of it, and then we can close off.
Yeah. Just I think I'm not sure where Dobbs is getting the information that ZLHR is doing PR work for the regime. I mean, with respect, there are very few organizations that have stood up, against the regime so publicly, so bravely as the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights has. I know that Rose has the ability not to perhaps get into defending the organization that she leads. Whatever information that they would give out, it would be information that is based on what they know, and I trust them. These guys work under very difficult conditions, and they are the first on the scene. They are what would be called first responders to any crisis. They are always there, and very often we don't even get to hear or see the work they do. So I don't know where that one is coming from, but maybe Rose might want to speak on it, although perhaps it would be unfair to put her in that situation. Concerning why matters are they are brought before the courts. Issues are raised in ways that sometimes are not always highlighted in the public domain. But when you are navigating that space in an authoritarian regime, it's a complex space, it's a difficult space, and people go through hoops. Sometimes lawyers themselves get arrested while they are representing their clients, matters that perhaps don't even reach the ears of the public. And maybe, look, I know that our time is running out. I could just conclude by saying, elections are critical. We live under an authoritarian regime. It's never easy. And one of the things that such regimes would actually prefer is for people to give up and not to participate in these electoral processes. They will always find their surrogates to compete with, and they'll get on for the next 5 years, and you'll still be mourning from outside. So it's important to take those spaces to do what is necessary. We always say we want reforms to be done, but it's also important to look at internal reforms. What is being done by opposition political parties? Are they fielding enough polling agents at all polling stations? We know that this hasn't happened in the past, and we have to raise our hands and say, look, we have failed. If we don't do that, you don't learn. Are we fielding the correct polling agents? Are we identifying the right polling agents for those jobs? Are we capacitating them enough in order to carry out their jobs? So those are important things that I think you have to look at internally and see what needs to be done. Learning also from other jurisdictions, other countries, what they have done in order to deal with these issues, dealing with authoritarianism. So the regime is never going to make the electoral environment perfect. The playing field is always going to be uneven. What will make the difference is what the opposition party will do to overcome those odds. And I will conclude with that and hand it over to Rose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Maybe just to highlight that there was a question around whether there is no possibility of doing private prosecutions in instances where there are cases of brutality against citizens. In other cases that are not prosecuted by the National Prosecuting Authority. In the past, there have been some attempts to institute private prosecutions. One of the challenges is that when you want to institute a private prosecution, you have to get a certificate issued by the National Prosecuting Authority saying that they will not annul a prosecute, that they are not prosecuting, for you to be able to actually institute the private prosecution. The other challenge that has also been faced is that there are cost implications around private prosecutions. And for some people, they have not really had any confidence in the criminal justice system anymore, especially where the police refuse to investigate or where the prosecution refuses to prosecute. So those are some of the challenges. But what we see over the years has been that victims of police brutality, political violence, have taken the civil action route where they've actually gone on to claim for monetary damages for pain and suffering against those that would have actually perpetrated those acts of violence against them. And we've had many cases where the victims have actually been awarded damages in the form of monetary awards by the courts. In some cases, the monetary awards have been honored. The only challenge has been the value of the money that is awarded because of the monetary changes, the currency changes that have taken place over the last few years, where you file a claim in United States dollars, and the next time you're being told that the United States dollar is equivalent to the local currency. And also issues around delays in finalizing those cases, inflation, and the implications on the value of those claims. So most victims opt for the civil claims because they get something out of it. And in terms of prosecutions, normally when a prosecution takes place for crimes, then it's basically just about punishing. But some victims would want something in return in terms of restorative justice. So we received some reports that the police were claiming to have actually started investigations and that they had arrested some people who had assaulted Mazibaba. But of course, from our end as Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, representing Mazibaba Shanduko, our main concern is around ensuring that he has adequate representation when he appears in court, and that if he wishes to take further action, then we can support him. And if there's any progress in terms of prosecuting those offenders, or if there's no progress, and he would want to also pursue the criminal route against the officers involved, then we can see how we can support, bearing in mind that our role will be limited. Prosecution is supposed to be done by the National Prosecuting Authority after investigation by the police. There are other issues in terms of complaining within the protocols of the police service, filing a complaint to compel for investigations and for prosecution, which we can explore if there is no progress in ensuring that the perpetrators are actually prosecuted. That is, the client really wishes to pursue the criminal route, which in some cases, some clients are very keen on, but in some instances, because of the lack of confidence in those involved in the criminal justice processes, some people would opt to go for the civil claims where they actually get something in return. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Rose, for that contribution, and just a special thank you to the panel. I think we had a really fruitful discussion today, and we touched on so many issues that thoroughly affect everyday life and everyday citizens. So I just want to thank you for taking your time out to share this space with CLC and take your time to give the citizens and just, give your insight and expertise in terms of the issues that we have. In my culture, if I had spent 2 hours questioning adults, I would have been in big trouble. But I'm happy that in this space, you get to pose questions to really important people who have a really powerful insight on our issues. So if you all could help me, all the participants, if you all could help me, just a show of I don't know, whatever emoji comes to your mind, just to thank our hosts for us, Dr. Magaisa and Rose, just to show your appreciation for taking their time and being here with us and all the knowledge that they've shared. So just an emoji for acknowledgement if you feel this, if you share the same sentiments to our host. I think that would be very much appreciated. And I see them coming. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this. And lastly, as well, if you can just also give yourselves, the listeners, an emoji. Just thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking your time, and thank you for those who have contributed and those who really find a cause in what we are trying to achieve. We are trying to spread the Constitution. We are trying to spread consciousness of the Constitution, and I hope